Hi everyone, my name is Christophe Béné. I work for an international research organization called CIAT, and today I'm going to talk about the political economy of food system transformation. But let's start these lectures by a little anecdote, which I hope will illustrate what I want to talk about in a very concrete way. So some time ago I was attending international meetings where the key speakers was talking about the big societal challenges that the world is currently facing in relation to food insecurity. And the speakers identify three key causes to food insecurity: climate change, geopolitical instability, and inequality. And this is where I found their discourse interesting and revealing. They said, the world is hampered by inequality, and this inequality is what prevents us from reducing food insecurity. Now for me, the inequality itself is not the root of the problem. The problem is that this inequality has been with us for decades, if not centuries, and that we still have not managed to reduce it. In fact, inequality is currently increasing globally. Now, why haven't we managed to reduce it? Because the political and economic systems are still the same. Despite the fact that we know those systems have generated and continue to generate that inequality, they have not been challenged. Well, I would argue that the situation is similar for our food system. Everyone is claiming that the food system needs to change, but no one is willing to tackle the root causes of its failure. We know that a large number of people still don't have enough access to healthy food, while in a sort of big paradox, an even larger number of people are now overweight or obese. And global food systems are unsustainable, accelerating climate change and threatening planetary health. So the need for a great transformation of our food system has been widely recognized. By transformation, experts now refer not just to the scale or the magnitude of the change, but also to the intention of building a better system that is aligned with sustainability goals. But we need to keep in mind that food systems have always been transforming. Yet the transformation that have gotten us to this point, many driven by technological innovation, have not brought only positive outcomes. In many cases, they have led to less healthy or less sustainable food system. So this is in fact where there's a strong similarity with the anecdote I just shared earlier. We know what the problem is. The food system we depend on is not working well. Yet we are still failing to address the root causes that led us to this point. Let's take the example of red meat, for instance. The Eat Lancet Commission determined that to be sustainable, the world should reduce more or less its production and consumption of red meat by about half. Remember, this is a global figure that doesn't account for places, especially in low and middle income countries, where people still need to consume more, not less protein. Still, globally, we know that we need to cut production and consumption of meat by half. Yet, what do we see? Governments in the three largest producing countries of red meat, that is China, Brazil, and the United States, continue to pour billions of dollars of subsidies into the sector every year. For instance, Tyson Food or Smithfield Food, two of the top producers of meat in the States, receive $570 million per year of subsidies between 1997 and 2005. The Chinese pork industry receives $22 billion every year to support its production. And the Brazilian federal government is a shareholder of JBS Food, the world's largest meat producers and the #1 global beef producer. Overall, the sector is obviously still growing. World production is projected to expand by nearly 44 million tons, reaching 373 million tons annually by 2030. But don't get me wrong here. I'm not saying that the only actors responsible for what we observe are the private sector or government. Because if the private sector is continuing to invest, and if governments are continuing to support the sector, it's also because the demand is still growing. Did you know that while the current consumption of meat already exceeds the Eat-Lancet Commission-referred diet intake by 300 to 600%, 3 billion people are expected to continue increasing their meat consumption in the coming years. So what do those examples tell us? Well, they tell us that while we know the system needs to change, we, as a global community, are not ready to change that system. Why? Because we all have interest, be they financial for some, or cultural for others, or even unconscious for many. We still have a strong interest in keeping the system as it is. What it means is that we need more than just a few individual initiatives to change the system. We need some structural, fundamental changes. But why are those not happening? Well, because there's still some strong and powerful actors who really don't want the system to change. Did you know that the combined spending of all agribusiness lobbying in Washington exceeds the lobbying expenditure of the entire US defense industry? Or did you know that between 2013 and 2015, food corporations in the US spent more than $192 million to stop various legislation aimed at improving information about food content? In that context, I believe that as scientists, practitioners, technical advisors, or whatever your role is in working on issues related to food system, we have a great responsibility in ensuring that food systems change and that they change in the right direction. How can we do that? Essentially by becoming more critical of our role in society, and in particular our own relationship with evidence and knowledge. Too often, I've seen colleagues and researchers assuming that, as experts, the best way we can contribute to the policies and decision-making process is by bringing more data and more evidence on the table. Indeed, for many researchers, the current paradigm is if decision-makers are making wrong decisions, it's simply because they don't have enough information or they don't have the right information. So under that mental model, generating more information or presenting it in a more digestible way is the solution. And if those decision makers don't act on those evidence, it's because they just don't get it. Well, decision makers are generally smart people, but they just don't necessarily function like us. And importantly, they don't always consider scientific evidence as the central element in their decision-making process. Often, they are more responsive to pressure from the news media or public opinion. I'm arguing that if we really want to contribute to changing the food system, our responsibility needs to go one step further. It's not enough to generate information in the hope that it will be picked up and used by decision makers. We need to get involved in that process. This doesn't mean that we need to become activists, no. It means that we need to change the way we operate. We need to acknowledge that, more often than not, the data that we generate are not just data, they are not neutral. They have political implications, especially when it comes to societal issues such as the sustainability of our food system. So, policymakers will use them only if they serve their agenda. If the data don't, they will just ignore them. But we also need to stop hiding behind simple narratives such as technological innovation are the solution. Why? Because we know that innovations are driven by economic profit, not by sustainability principles. This means that technological innovation, left on its own, will not solve the problem. After all, The food system as we see it today is the very result of technological innovation. And that did not prevent it from becoming highly unsustainable. On the contrary, if, as scientists or experts, we don't recognize and challenge the politics of it, our food system will never move in the direction that is needed. So, if I ask you now, who bears responsibility for the current situation, what will be your answer? Individual consumers? The private sector? The government? The system as a whole? Yes, the answer is probably all of the above. That was easy, right? But I hope that I managed to demonstrate that now that we're aware of it, we need to stop being over-optimistic or even naive and start doing two things. First, we need to acknowledge that it's not enough for scientists to simply generate more data and evidence. We need to engage in a much more active way, supporting decision makers when we can, but also not being afraid of documenting and challenging them when they misuse or ignore those pieces of evidence. We need to hold them more accountable for their decision around food system. And second, we need to acknowledge that market-driven innovation do not deliver only good or sustainable changes. We need therefore to turn the system on its head. Instead of having innovation driving societal changes and public policy playing the role of enabling environment, we need sustainably oriented public policies proactively driving the innovation process. Innovations must be aimed toward sustainability, ensuring that profit is aligned with sustainability goals. The great food system transformation can happen, and science has an important role to play. But for transformative changes to happen, evidence, innovation, and governance will need to align toward a more sustainable trajectory.